Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to the SoFin Podcast, part of the FinServe Marketing Podcast Network. This week on the show, Ari Palmer, the CEO and co-founder of TaxTaker, is my guest. Now, TaxTaker is a startup that, as the name suggests, has something to do with taxes, but instead of paying taxes, you take taxes. So there you get it, the TaxTaker name. Now, I don't want to ruin all of the really cool tax nerdiness that Ari is going to share with you. Let's just say you want to buckle up for this one. It's really interesting. I promise you, we're not going to get too in the weeds with arcane tax talk, but if you ever get a chance to meet Ari, and I think it comes through in her voice, there is an energy and a passion for helping her customers and the TaxTaker team's customers that just bursts through when you meet her and where you hear her talk about what she and the team at TaxTaker are doing. Now, I first met Ari, as you'll hear me say in this episode, about a year and a half ago when she came to the SoFin event in 2019. And she couldn't wait to come up and introduce herself and just tell me what she was working on. And as soon as she told me, I was immediately transported back to my early days of my career when I learned about a similar concept in the tax code. And I was really found myself geeking out on it. And you'll hear Ari and I have that conversation here. So ever since then, I've been a big fan of hers and TaxTaker. So you're going to want to listen to this episode, especially if you're a fintech startup or you know people who are running startups. This episode is going to put money in your pocket with a high degree of likelihood. So buckle up and get ready, as I said. Okay. Also, make sure you swing by finservemarketing.com/podcast to check out the latest episodes from other podcasts on the podcast network. First off, check out the Modern Financial Advisor podcast by Trulytics, in which Dan Caprill was a guest last week. Dan runs a company called Advisor Architect, and Dan raised a really interesting question. Why aren't more financial advisors their own wealthiest clients? A little hint, it has something to do with a lack of focus on profitability. So if there's a financial advisor in your life, you want to make sure you check out that episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. Also, check out the latest episodes of the Advisor Financing Forum by Skyview Partners. I have the founder and CEO, Scott Wetzel, on for two kind of intro-like podcasts in which Scott is introducing what is Skyview Partners, kind of giving us a little bit of the origin story, similar to what you're going to hear Ari Palmer from TaxTaker share about TaxTaker today. And Scott also has a second episode in there in which we cover Financing 101 for independent financial advisors and RIAs. Little kind of a preview. Historically, it's really not been possible for financial advisors and RIAs to access capital in the form of borrowing money from banks. And it's really has something to do with the fact that advisors don't have assets, right? They don't have a factory, they don't have machinery or anything. So it makes borrowing money challenging. But Scott and the Skyview team have solved that challenge. So again, if you have financial advisors or RIAs or other wealth management firms in your network, or if you are one of them, you're going to want to check this out. And this is one of the interesting things when I think about fintech and new financial solutions coming into the market, right? This is a financial solution for financial businesses. And it's fascinating that there wasn't a solution for people in this business before. And Skyview is making it happen. So really, really cool stuff. Okay, enough of me yammering on. Let's get to it with Ari Palmer of TaxTaker.
Well, hey, Ari, it's wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you for making time to join us.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm so excited to be talking with you today.
Well, we are going to have a great time. So I thought we would kick things off with maybe a classic elevator pitch, because TaxTaker is something that's really innovative, and I hadn't given it too much thought before you told me about it. So let's go. You're 60 seconds. We're on the elevator. We're going to the top.
Let's go for it. And actually, I almost want to give myself a 10-second pre-elevator pitch to just say that I should probably say that it's helpful to say what R&D tax credits are. So I'm not making any assumptions.
Oh, okay. Let's do it.
Really quickly, the R&D tax credit is something our government has in place that rewards businesses that invest in developing, designing, and improving upon products and processes, inventions, software, etc. So having that background on what the R&D tax credit is, TaxTaker is a faster and smarter way for startups to access and secure the available research and development tax credits they're eligible for every year. So our software and expert support has automated a majority of the traditionally manual process for putting these R&D credit studies together, and thus has cut down the cost so that smaller businesses can actually take advantage of the benefits that the big guys, the big businesses have been taking for years.
That's really great. You killed it. All right, come off the elevator, pitch to the boardroom. I love it.
All right, great.
So, what's really funny? When you and I first started talking about this, it really hit me in a special place. And I think I've shared this story with you, but for obviously those people who have never heard the story, I used to work for State Street Corporation for the chief financial officer. And what that did for me, because State Street is a giant global firm, is it gave me visibility into every business line that we had. And one of our business lines was energy tax credits. And so for just like you're talking about, where the government makes tax credits available for things that they think are important. So in the case of R&D, we want companies to do research and development and innovate and create new things. And we're willing to give them a tax credit to do so and incentivize that. Well, for energy exploration, the same thing happens, right? They were creating these, hey, go drill some holes in the ground and get us energy at the time. This is back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Well, if you're drilling holes in the ground, you're spending a bunch of money, but you're not making a lot of money just yet, right? So these companies, like, these tax credits are wonderful and all, but what I really need is more cash. So they would sell them to other companies that had lots of income and use them to offset. And so State Street figured out a way to do that. And I was always like, in all this fintech awesomeness, somebody needs to come around and start attacking that type of thing. And then I meet you a year and a half or so ago, and I'm like, oh, no way, she's doing it. This is amazing.
Here we are.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
True.
So one of the things, and I really like this story, but tell me a little bit about your big aha moment that led you to make TaxTaker a reality. Because I remember you telling me the story about how you ended up here in Austin, but maybe you could share it with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually working for my father's tax practice. I was doing consulting work for him and really was doing the R&D tax credit manual, working as a value add resource for accounting firms really all across the country. CPAs just kind of took us everywhere because they saw a need to have a specialty provider on hand for this business offering. And it was one of these things that kind of kept getting extended and then retroactively extended. So it was really difficult for both accounting firms and businesses to plan around these tax credits. But even so, we were routinely able to help businesses that were mostly in taxable positions benefit from some of these savings. But the R&D credit finally became permanent at the end of 2015. And so the whole industry rejoiced, and all of us were just so excited. I was shouting it off the mountaintops, all these businesses that, maybe I couldn't have helped before, that were startups potentially, or pass-through companies that kind of had some hindrances just because of the way that the credit was laid out originally, had been kind of modified. So we actually landed in Austin because we had gotten so much business from all around the country, and we needed somewhere to be more centrally located for our clients. And we also saw our clients coming here. It was just kind of this new space that was humming. And for me, being a Californian, I was like, this is great. I can touch down in Austin, and if I ever have to go anywhere else, I'm only, a 2.5 hour flight away. So kind of going back to, I can shout this from the mountaintops, I can help everyone now, because as part of permanency, a really key change happened within the code. And that now allows for startup companies, regardless of profitability or not, for the first 5 years of their life, they can take advantage of this tax credit as a payroll tax credit. Whereas before they would have to wait to become profitable and have corporate income tax. And for startup companies, they're like, if ever, right?
Right.
So now we can inject these credits against their payroll taxes up to $250,000. And so I was just like, all right, I'm going to Austin. We're opening up this new office to be more centrally located for our CPA partners. Now we can help all the startup companies that, didn't really have meaningful benefit. And then I was just, boom, stopped, because even with an efficient process that we had at my dad's consulting shop, when you have specialized tax attorneys and subject matter engineers and accountants, those billable rates, the hours, they just stack up fast. And so, a consulting firm that's going to be usually having a minimum of around $20,000 for a study, when that's the credit amount for a startup, it just doesn't make sense. And we were seeing that happen within accounting firms as well. So essentially, accountants were saying, how do we clone you to make you come downstream? And that was kind of our aha moment, was, we thought there had to be a way to automate a majority of the workflow necessary to gather the data for the study and prepare, generate the credits, calculate the credits, and the forms necessary for filing. And that's really why TaxTaker was born.
That's really interesting. Two things jumped out to me. Number one, you mentioned the permanency, but then the fact that it was a genuine credit that you could use on your payroll tax versus it having to have actual income, right? It was a big thing. Like you said, for many startups, if you're in your first few years of life as a startup, you may be burning through millions of dollars of venture capital that you've raised and so forth, but you are not generating a profit. And frankly, your investors don't want you to generate a profit. They want you to scale, right? At that phase, like this is scale phase, profit, harvest later with profit. So it's really interesting that was there. But I love how you talked about, you saw, because you've been through it, right? Like this is something you were doing, you were in the weeds, you knew how this worked, and you were able to see like, what are the things that are repetitive in this process? What can we systematize and then make that a product?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that really across the whole accounting industry. We're seeing this shift towards advisory services anyway, right? So I think a lot of accountants particularly have seen, all right, technology isn't necessarily going to replace us. It's going to take away the things that we don't really, at the end of the day, want to be doing. We want to be proactively helping our clients, discussing their business objectives and goals on a go forward basis versus, just being in the thick of a tax return.
I thought it was, so you told me your history, and I love hearing where the ideas come from. I can't, I always geek out on that as an entrepreneur myself, and then somebody who just spends a lot of time in the startup space. The first thing that popped out was like, is she like Wonder Woman? Does she also know how to code? Like, did she sit down and just like bang this out? So do you know how to code?
Oh, I wish. But then again, I truly have thought about this a lot, and I think I might have fallen into the trap of over engineering every feature that I'd wanted if I did know how to code. So I think hindsight, there is something about being on a strict budget that really does, it pushes you to prioritize out of necessity and make you really keep the business case at the forefront of your endeavor. So really having to choose what is necessary versus what I want and what are nice to haves, right?
Right.
So that being said, knowing how to code, would have been a big expense reduction, right? I think I had mentioned to you when we first met that I needed a couple of features so badly just to get it into the hands of some of my first customers that I sold my car for development hours. I was like, this has to go out. I'm all in. Car, not a necessity anymore. Developers, here we go.
That's like it, that is one of those classic stories that someday you're going to tell from stage, and people are going to be like, oh wow, that's a level of like, just, you are all in. and a pure belief. And here's the thing, there's gonna be lots of time to buy new cars.
Oh, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. I get my steps in now. It's great. I don't know. July and August are tough here in Austin, but other
Yes.
than that, yeah, I'm fitter for it. It's
There you
great.
go. That's funny. That's funny as heck. Well, you will have a car someday. Or maybe you won't need one. Maybe just Uber everywhere. There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's fantastic. So what's been your biggest challenge so far? So, you obviously taking code aside, as you're a first-time entrepreneur, correct?
That's correct.
Tech startup entrepreneur. So what was the biggest challenge you faced so far that maybe you didn't expect, or maybe you did expect, but it was harder than you thought it would be?
Yeah. So I think our team is really good at managing expectations, but I don't know that I managed my expectations correctly from the get-go. So, because I think one of my biggest challenges really from the get-go was, patience and really honing in on what our clients said that they wanted versus what they actually wanted. So really diving into what our customers' kind of requests are versus what their needs are, kind of similar to that whole development process for myself. Because when we first released this product, and really the catalyst, right, besides the R&D credit becoming permanent, was that accountants were asking us for it. They wanted some type of solution to be able to offer their clients. So when we initially released this product, it was positioned as a co-branded / white label offering for CPA firms. And they were excited about it. We were excited about it. And then we go to launch and it's kind of like crickets, right? We basically had to wait for them to sell our product. And if you can't prove out product market fit and you have cash flow constraints, you're looking at a coffin, right around the corner. So that's a challenge. And so we honed in on that the cloud accountants were our best early adopters for this solution. And for that, we're ever grateful for those folks that jumped on and were able to put a bunch of clients in right away. But we really, really had to dive deeper. And since then, we've adjusted a bunch of our sales cycle, and we're actually going more direct to the actual startup companies themselves, and then looping in the accountant after the fact.
So talk a little bit more about that, those first customers. How did you go about landing those first customers? So and I guess maybe to back up a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong. You mentioned you're working with your dad's shop and you're out there doing the consulting there, but were you a trained salesperson? Do you know how to kick in doors and get the deal? Or is this a new thing for you too? Did you not only have to learn how to be a bit of an entrepreneur, but also, now I have to go learn how to sell? What was that like?
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed, speaking with people. And I think what attracted me to this industry really from the get-go in my early 20s, I would have never been able to speak with the founders and innovators and getting in the room with those kind of folks, had I not been in this space. So I thought it was the coolest thing that I could be talking about tax credits, right? But I could be talking to quite literally someone who's sending breadbasket satellites into space, or a pet DNA company the next, or some wearable technology in the next hour. I was just completely hooked. So I felt like the sales cycle or the sales training kind of came over time, because it was kind of just, I was having conversations with really, really cool people. So it didn't feel icky. And so I just really was kind of self-trained, and shadowed my dad and shadowed other reps and leaders within the organization, and just got better at, closing the deal from after having the conversations.
Yeah. And that translated into, when you get TaxTaker off the ground, how does that translate to you being able to land clients? How were those first clients landed? Were you, just talk to me about that first client acquisition? What was that looking like for you?
Sure. So fortunately, because we've been doing this for a long time and we have this domain expertise from the consulting business, I had built all these relationships with accounting firms and fractional CFOs and other kind of proactive advisors. So I had this kind of pre-built really list of accountants that I couldn't help with the original model, but I had still stayed in touch with. So I had actually been just asking them like, hey, is this something you'd be interested in? I've gotten some requests over here for this type of solution. Is this something you think you would offer? So they were really actually part of the building of the company. And so it was much easier for me to go to them, and say, okay, I have something for you to try now. And they were actually willing to pay for it because I had kind of done that groundwork. I had maintained those relationships and I'd been kind of giving them little bread bites along the way, but something was coming.
Yeah. I think that's a really smart insight and thing that many entrepreneurs can learn from, right? The fact that if you already have a domain expertise and you're in the space already, it's not that it's easy, but the road is at least partially paved for you to now open up a discussion about a new offering, or you're doing a slight pivot in your career. And instead of being a consultant, you're coming with a technology solution. And there may be still some hand holding and consulting along the way. As you mentioned, you bring the expertise of you and your team to help out. But I think it's a really smart thing because oftentimes I see entrepreneurs try to jump, especially for fintech. They have no prior financial services or financial technology expertise, and suddenly they're in fintech and they're not necessarily prepared for the growth, which is really slow. I always joke in this industry, everybody expects that hockey stick growth. And when they think of hockey stick, they just think of this really sharp growth. Well, in this industry, it looks like an actual hockey stick, which has a super long, flat shaft that has almost no growth whatsoever for a very long time. And then at the end, it finally up at the end, right? So you have to know that coming in. There's regulatory stuff when you're dealing with taxes, right? You have to make sure that everything's done well. If you're on any type of financial transaction, there's going to be some regulatory constraints. And then people are oftentimes a little slower on the adoption phase. So the fact that you came in knowing the space, I think was a huge asset.
Yeah, you're 100% accurate on that hockey stick analogy. It really looks like the real deal, right? So yes, absolutely. I mean, leveraging your existing network and, kind of coming from an angle that doesn't seem as obscure. I think that's going to help founders really from the get-go. But yeah, you just have to have that grit and that resiliency to just hang in there if you can.
Yeah.
Just because this space in particular, it just takes some time. The sales cycles are longer. It's very relationship driven. And I still have folks that, they'll ping me from that I met 5 years ago. I'm like, oh, finally.
Yeah, right.
We get to work on a project together. So it helps that I'm still in the space that I was.
Yeah.
In a kind of in a new way.
I'm glad you mentioned that sometimes people pop up 5 years later, and that's something I try to communicate with clients as well and entrepreneurs as well. Is like all the type of things we're doing from a networking and a sales perspective is that, look, not everybody's going to be in the market for your service or product right now. Whatever reason, they might not be ready, but eventually they will be. And you just never know. So if you keep at it, you keep putting content out, you keep interacting with people and so forth, you'd be surprised that every once in a while somebody pings you from a few years ago and says, hey, guess what? Ari, can we talk about that tax credit stuff? I think we need some help.
So true. And I have to say, as part of this kind of process since we've launched, as much as it's been 3 parts tough, it's also been equally as supportive through kind of the relationships that all of our team members have built throughout the years. And then through kind of the channel partners that help the clients that we're helping as well. But we always say it's never too early to talk to someone, because it's usually not a matter of, it can be a matter of if they qualify or if they're going to benefit, but usually it's all around timing. It's really about when is it going to make the most sense, or maybe what are some of their other needs right now that we can pass other recommendations or referrals to, and then it always ends up coming full circle.
Well, and for you, and I also think at the early stages of a business, as you are still in, those conversations also start to highlight potential other product extensions, right? Or new services that you could offer within your full suite, right? So right now you're generally a one product offering firm, but like all companies, at some point in time, there will be what's next? What else can we offer our customers? Like those customers who've grown out of startup and have made it, and now they're generating profits. What's the next thing they need help with that is a little more complex than it needs to be when done manually, that can be systematized, right? So I have a feeling you'll have a lot of new stuff. You probably already discovered a few. You probably have some roadmap in your head already.
Well, it's funny you say that because even on our prospect calls before they even engage with us and we've gone over what benefits they're looking at, before they even sign a quote with us, they'll say, what else? What else should I be looking at? Where are my other savings opportunities? And they get so excited about it. And so yeah, you're right. We've been kind of working on what's that going to look like outside of our initial core product, which is really fun.
Following up on that just a little more, that's why I think it's so important to do what you are doing, meaning you're still taking, at least from my observation, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're still taking a very hand-holding, in some cases, white glove approach to this. You're not just putting on blasting email marketing and social media marketing, hoping to drive somebody to a sales funnel and they just click buy and that's it. Right? You're still talking to the initial customers. And I think a lot of firms, especially even though they have a SaaS-based solution, they resist it because they're like, well, that's going to hurt our numbers, right? And VCs aren't going to like that. It's like, yeah, but you're also not going to learn as much from your customer if you're not talking to them. And in the early days, you do have to hold their hand to teach them and to, evangelize, but also to discover what's working and what's not working in your product.
It's so true. You definitely have to be in the trenches, I think, to set yourself up for longer term success. As much as it's nice, you're right, to find those typical like great margins by just going through a click funnel and never having to talk to a rep because maybe the deal sizes are smaller.
Right.
I mean, on our discovery calls, we're learning so much more about a client than we ever would through a sign up. We're learning about the types of companies that they're working with, what technologies they're using, what they're looking to use, what their future business plans are, just things that you just never know from just a click farm sign up. So that's been really helpful, not only for our own kind of internal development and product roadmap, but also just kind of going forward of what are things that people are going to want.
So speaking of things that people want, so I have this tradition that at SoFin, I always tell people, have an ask for the audience, right? Have something you want from people. And so whether you're on stage, as you were a few months ago, or it's on this podcast, or it's just at the event and you're mingling with people, or you go into another conference, you should always have an ask in mind, like something you want. And it doesn't mean you're like all about me, 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 me. It actually means don't forget that you are there for a reason, that you're trying to grow your business. You have a career goal. You have some reason why you came to that networking event. There's a reason why you're on that stage or on this podcast. So what would you like from the audience? Somebody who's listening, what's your ask for them today?
Yes. So we are trying to build the megaphone, right? So while there are so many proactive accountants and advisors out there, over 90% of eligible companies miss out on the R&D credit every year. And we think that's a problem. So our ask is that if you are a startup founder or you work for a startup or you just know a startup, maybe you invest in a startup, get in touch with us or recommend that startup and we can take a look because it's incredible how many dollars are on the table every year that go untapped. So really that's our biggest ask. Our biggest challenge is just getting the word out there because people hear tax or accounting and they think not my job, but the R&D credit it's just so significant and we need to make as many impressions as possible. So that's our ask.
I love it. So that ask is actually one of those things where it's like, here's something you can help the startup folks in your life with, right? This is legitimate cash that can help their business. And if you know anybody in the startup world, you know that there are times in every startup's life where it's kind of a life support scenario, near death experiences, as they say, where you're like, I don't know how much longer we have. We need some money here, and every dollar matters. So that means they can't allow money to go to waste, right? And if this is money is just sitting there ready for them, go get it. Talk to Ari.
Talk to
TaxTaker.
us.
That's right.
Talk to
That's
us.
right. So I want to shift gears back a little more about you as an individual, because I'm equally interested in entrepreneurs and what makes them tick. And there is no, in my experience, talking to entrepreneurs for years, there's no one thing. Everybody's wired a little bit differently, and we all can be entrepreneurs. So that's why I like to ask this type of question. Have you always been entrepreneurial? Or like, did you have like a lemonade stand, or were you selling, I don't know, bracelets, or like doing all sorts of online businesses when you were a kid in high school? Or is this your first thing? Like, what makes you like, what's that wiring that makes you entrepreneurial, I guess? Or is this a new thing for you?
Yeah, that's funny. It's a great question, right? Because I think when we're first time founders, we're like, this is our first time being an entrepreneur. But then if we really trail back through our lifetime, we're like, oh, wait, we've been kind of doing some kind of hustly
Yeah.
entrepreneur moves for a lot of it. I mean, I can actually think back to elementary school. I would go to my dad's office and I would get really excited to go into the office supply cabinet. And I would just get like a whole bag full of office supplies and say, hey, Dad, can I bring this home? Like, I need these things for school. And he was like, sure, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of weird. You're excited by erasable pens, and then I would go to school and I would bring that bag of office supplies and I would sell them. And I would
Nice.
sell that. Oh yeah. I had demand. I would actually sell them for these little seal cards that were basically you could trade in to get pizza parties and all these different gifts. So I was kind of tricking the system for getting rewards through elementary school.
All right.
But it was a different form of currency, and I was getting pizza parties for my classmates all through my office supply gig. And then there was another time where I saw someone make a toothbrush bracelet, and I said, oh, I could scale that. I could make 10 toothbrush bracelets, sell those to my friends and classmates. In college, I was selling t-shirts and I was organizing buses to a local bar, and they would pay me per head that I would bring in, and was just reeling in the cash there, one of my best gigs. So yeah, I've always kind of just had this kind of knack for doing side hustles, if you will.
I
And I
love
always
it.
just kind of knew I would be I always kind of knew I wanted to create my own business, but I just never really knew what it was going to look like and when it was going to be.
Isn't that is fascinating. I always think that's so interesting where, you know, you see opportunity that others aren't seeing, or you find that there's like, ooh, I think I can make some money off this. It's just kind of like that wiring in there, right? Oh, I think I could do this. That is fascinating. That's fascinating. So were you always, and I mean this in the most complimentary way, were you always like really nerdy and geeking out, and like, so you like the way you talk about the tax credit stuff and the accounting stuff, I gotta tell you, really nerdy, but
It's so
in a
nerdy.
cool way. It is. It's like, it's the type of stuff where like, this is what I mean when I say I love this space, because it is the somewhat arcane enough and nerdy enough where the average person, even in the industry that you're selling to, kind of just like, oh yeah, whatever. Like they're not thinking about it, but it takes a kind of a special kind of like nerdiness to be into it, right? Like, so we always like that too, like that you're nerded out on stuff easily.
Yeah, I definitely get really excited by businesses,
Yeah.
right? So I totally, I mean, I nerd out around the tax credit industry, so that's really nerdy. But I think I also nerd out on, what other people are into. I think that's the best part of my job, is that I am talking to creators and innovators all day long. So I love to kind of play along with them, like, oh, have you thought about this? Or not even if they ask, for my opinion or not, but I think it's such a unique space to be in the startup community, where we're all kind of looking for different perspectives. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I genuinely get excited waking up every day talking about tax credits. So
I can tell.
definitely
You and I,
classify myself as a nerd.
you and I have had quite a few phone conversations, and we've had some in-person conversations, but every time, like, you're just like, so like, just like ready to jam. You're like ready to go and excited. I love that. I asked you about what was the biggest challenge so far for TaxTaker, but what's been your biggest area of personal growth necessary that you've had to go through so far?
Yeah. So I think, just kind of like a lot of folks end up learning as they go in the workforce, there's a lot of things that I've never done before. So I have helped recruiting, and managed teams, but I've never fully hired my own staff and built out those processes. And I've never fundraised before, or joined accelerators, or took VC meetings. So all these things, I kind of had to learn on the fly, and kind of pull from different areas and people that were willing to give me advice and mentorship. And I just had to really learn how to ask for help, which isn't something I've really had to do before. I've asked for help in training and certain things like that, or from, my colleagues on teaching me how the inner workings of tax credit work, or why this company qualifies, or this, how this calculation works. But I've never been on the startup journey myself with a founder hat on myself, even though I've been working with these types of companies for a long time. So I think really in the last year and a half, I've probably gone through the most professional and personal development than I have really in my adult life.
Yeah.
Just because I've had to just dive right in. I chose a lane, and I was like, well, these are the parts to it, so I've got to just figure it out.
Yeah.
So whether it's, doing sales, marketing, legal, fundraising, accounting, product development, HR, you name it, you wear all the hats.
I love it. It's interesting. You articulated something there that is so important for other founders and all of us to remind ourselves as we are on these journeys with new businesses or whatever. It's like, there are going to be times where you feel like you're underwater and you can't believe how much stuff you don't know, or how many things you have to figure out. But remind yourself, I think it's important to do so. I do it myself, right? All the time is, hey, you know what? You've had to learn lots of stuff over the course of your life. There are lots of times you've had jobs, or you've started businesses, or started some sort of new initiative in your life in which you didn't know anything and you're brand new at it. I tell my kids all the time, like, everybody's new at something once, right? I coach basketball. Well, I don't anymore. The kids are too good for my coaching skills now. But I would always say to the kids, like, listen, everybody's new to this. Like, so we'd always have that one new girl or the new boy on the team who'd never played basketball before. It's like, that's okay. By the end of the season, trust me, you're scoring goals and you're making meaningful things. And it's the same thing for us entrepreneurs, right? You're going to have times you're like, I've never had to figure this type of stuff out before. How to hire a developer. What do you do? Like, what type of code are we going to use to build this type of thing? What's the right thing, right? So don't worry. You'll find the answers. You figure it out.
100%. You have to give yourself some grace. And there's a reason why you've chosen this path. And, your first day is not going to look like today.
Yeah.
So everyone improves and gets better. And you just have to really show up. If you're adamant in wanting to do something, you just got to show up. And fortunately, if you ask for help, and sometimes you don't even know how to ask for help, but you just try, it starts to lay its course. And it's amazing how far you can come in a short amount of time.
Well, I'm so impressed because I met you when you were pre-customer, and you were just starting the beginning parts of the dev. And like, now it's out there and kicking butt. I love it. So let's kind of like get ready to wrap things up by shifting back to TaxTaker. How does the
product actually work? So if I was going to on board with it, if our company was like, we have the R&D expense, let's figure this out. How's the product work so they can get started?
Yeah. So aside from that kind of preliminary kind of hand-holding call, just to determine that you're eligible and it's warranted of going through the exercise of claiming the credit. Once you get into the product, it's very much like a TurboTax guided process. So we're asking you questions about some of your financials, some of your personnel, as well as some of your projects and activities over the course of the year. And then since we are a very highly communicative bunch, even though we've got tooltips and definitions, we're always a call or email away too. So you've got an engineer and CPA dedicated to you at any given time. Once you've gone through and uploaded your financials and answered questions about your business, it typically takes an hour or two, mostly because you've got to kind of go find some of those things from the year before. Then our software is it's calculating the credit, it's preparing the forms and the documentation. And then those CPAs and engineers are putting their final touches on the report and sending it back to you and your payroll provider and accountant for filing. So once it's all said and done, it's really, really a quick process. And it's funny, while we've gotten compliments on the interface and the usability of it, I think clients, they're just most excited about the money, right? So it's pretty cool that in a couple of hours plus maybe a day turnaround or so, they're looking at, our average startup client gets $41,000 back. So
that's not insignificant, just so you know, for a lot of startups, that might be like 2 months of payroll.
It's been said before.
Yeah.
We've had some clients, particularly because of the last few months and kind of some dire straits, and they've said, thank you. You've kept the lights on for 2 more months. And so, we're just so happy we can help in some small way.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And do companies use TaxTaker on an ongoing basis, or is this a one-time, you only get one time to do this?
Yeah, so they can actually use us every year. So every year that they're developing or improving upon their product or their software, they're going to be eligible for these R&D credits. We're mostly a once a year interaction, but we are actually in the process of building out a greater integration stack for our customers with products and services they're already using. So they can kind of tap in and have a more ongoing tracking of their savings. So that's coming, but ultimately, it's just got to be done before they file their tax return every year.
Okay, so last question. What is the process for an accounting firm to start using TaxTaker? I assume it's a little bit different because, for an individual company, like you said, you send them a login and walk them through it and so forth. But if I'm a CPA firm that's got 100 accountants under the umbrella, what's that process like?
Sure. So they can actually either just refer us for this one piece of the return, which has been the more popular option. As much as they like to offer it, a lot of times they're like, you guys are the experts. Please just take care of my client for this one piece and make sure I have the forms for filing. But the neat thing about even when we work with clients directly is that the CPA can still have oversight on the project and can contribute to the project. But then we also do have this kind of co-branded label offering as well, where the CPA can actually invite their clients through kind of a sub-license. And then we serve as back-end support for the CPA and client. So really kind of depending on what the CPA's needs are or wants are, we're kind of set up for kind of 2 kind of great options.
It's really fantastic. I love it. This is so exciting. And like I said at the beginning, this is something that I've not specific to R&D, but like I said, the energy tax credit, which is basically the same thing in the early days. Yeah. I just always wanted somebody to create something like this because for me, it was such an eye opener to like, no way, somebody's making money off this. And here you are helping companies do that. So this is wonderful. I really appreciate having you on the show, Ari. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was a real treat.
Okay, great. If people need to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you or the TaxTaker team?
Yeah, so it's easytaxtaker.com. And my email is simple, ari@taxtaker.com. Ari.
There you go. Boom. All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
All right. Huge thanks to Ari Palmer for carving some time out of her busy startup life to spend it with us. One of the things that I found most inspiring about Ari's story is the courage component, right? What does it take to decide, not only do I want to do this, I kind of need to do this, and I'm willing to push the chips into the middle of the table, as she shared with the selling her car story to make this thing happen, but also pushing the ego into the middle of the table and be willing to attack something even though you're not quite sure what the next steps are going to be. So being open enough and vulnerable enough to seek help and to build the network. And that's how Ari and I met last year, as I mentioned. So really, really appreciative for her joining us. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode and got something out of it for yourself and your business as well. Assuming you did, now's the time for me to execute my ask for the audience. Please do like and subscribe to the podcast and share it with somebody else in your network, whether that's just clicking the share button on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or wherever you happen to cross the podcast. Or if you're on our email list, make sure you forward that email to somebody you like. Say, hey, you might like this new podcast called the SoFin Podcast, and the network they got going on over there at Finster Marketing really seems interesting, and there's some interesting people appearing on these shows. Love to do that because we want to grow this community. This community is for all of us, right? Hopefully you're getting something out of it. You're learning some things. And also, hopefully, maybe you'll be on the show. So if you'd like to be on the SoFin Podcast, or if you think you have something relevant to share for one of our network partners, like the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast or the Advisor Financing Forum. So if that's your audience, if you're looking to get in front of financial advisors or wealth management firms and you think you have something valuable for them to hear about, that you can help them with their business, let me know. We'll make sure we get you on the shows because that's what this network is all about. Rising tide lifts all boats, and we want to build a big harbor and lift lots of boats, okay? All right, enough of that analogy. Took it too far. Anyway, all right, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Please do stay safe and be kind to one another. We could all use a little empathy, a little bit of kindness, right? The world's trying to punch us all around a little bit right now. So give somebody a smile through your mask. Let them know your eyes. Smile with your eyes, okay? All right, we'll see you next time on the SoFin Podcast. See ya. Bye.